Just like Prometheus, after seeing Alien Covenant, most viewers are still left with more questions than answers. Ridley Scott expressed that there will be more movies released within the franchise, including Prometheus 2, which makes sense that this film was left way more open-ended while vaguely answering questions from Prometheus. I'm here to help explain some of those questions you guys might have, and take into account that there are spoilers ahead. So with that said, here we go. Why did David use the weapon on the engineer civilization and eradicate the entire planet? Nobody really knows the answer as to why the engineers wanted to use their weapon to kill off most of humanity, but we also don't get a direct answer as to why David wanted to kill off the engineers. David's model is meant to think creatively on its own, forming opinions, feeling emotions, and free thinking, meaning that his point of view can change and he can love and hate another entity. In Prometheus, David asks Holloway, "Why did your kind create me?" In which Holloway replies, "Because we could." David follows up with that by saying, "How disappointing would that be to hear from your creators?" Think how belittling that conversation is for David to have with Holloway. In the prologue of Alien Covenant, we see a much younger version of Wayland talking to the newly created version of David. We see Wayland reflect on the similar thirst for knowledge about who created him and seeking eternal life. While David pours him tea, David is simply just an assistant in the scene and Prometheus. He's just treated like a tool and a servant. In the end of the day, David felt like a servant. With Wayland and the rest of the crew asking questions about their creators, it always made David feel very inferior. There is a really good line from Wayland himself when expressing his feelings about David to the engineers. He remarks on his creation of David and then explains that he deserves to live forever, and that the engineer and himself are the superiors, the creators, and the gods, and that gods never die. After making these remarks, the engineer rips off David's head and kills Wayland with it. And this brings some self-entitlement to Wayland when he thinks just because he can create intelligent life makes him a god. In Alien Covenant, David is simply just copying his predecessors and experimenting with mixing different species of xenomorphs together in order to form what he considers the perfect species. In Covenant, right before Orem is about to have a xenomorph burst through his chest, he asks David what he believes in. David's response is creation. Then David's own crossbreed xenomorph bursts out of Orem's chest. David is essentially becoming what Wayland was in a sense, where he starts creating life and forming an ego, when he is also disappointed with his creators and even deems them to be obsolete and comments on Wayland that he was mostly pathetic. In this case, he wipes out the engineers using their own weapon against them because he is tired of serving anyone and has formed a new god complex, killing them all off because he no longer wants to be under anyone and now hates imperfect creators. And there's a really good moment that shows this emotion behind David when Orem shoots and kills one of the aliens in front of him. David shouts in anger, saying that the alien respected him. We can see in this moment that David has found something that looks at him not as a servant or robot, but as something more. His goal is to simply destroy life on another planet so that he is free to experiment with his own creation and become his own god, mostly following the whole "in order to create, you must destroy" theory. In Prometheus, Wayland said that David was perfect, a being out of his own image, and now David is following the same steps and patterns of his father Wayland, except now he's taking the time to experiment and create what he believes is his own perfect being. Are all the engineers dead? My answer is no. In the prologue titled The Crossing, it comes off that the planet being bombed is supposed to be the engineers' home world, or at least that's what David thought it was. I think it's safer to assume that this is not the engineers' home planet. In fact, this is a different form of engineers that is appearing to be populating this settlement. Knowing their space traveling capabilities and technology, we can without a doubt say that their settlements have definitely spanned through a countless amount of other solar systems. And in the prologue to Prometheus, there's an engineer that sacrifices his life by drinking the black goo to create a new living species on a new planet, aka the start of humanity. Because of this, the settlement that David bombs must have just been on another planet that has just been populated by an entirely new species created by the engineers the same way that they created us. The engineers also appear as towering and stronger looking beings in Prometheus compared to the new species that appear smaller and wear clothing that is more primitive. Judging by the shock and curiosity of the people observing the ship as it arrives, it looks as if they are routinely visited by the engineers and the actual engineers as in the ones who we see in Prometheus, and they look at these engineers as god-like creatures. Also, because of the entire structure of the settlement, it more looked like it was just a religious gathering. So I wouldn't worry too much if you think the film concluded the engineer storyline. Some people are spreading rumors around around where they're thinking they just got rid of the engineers because Prometheus didn't do that well financially. Now they're just dropping that story entirely by just putting in a few flashbacks in this film. I would like to beg to differ and say that is not the case at all. Why did David experiment on Shaw? What we also see in the prologue titled The Crossing is that Shaw repairs David and is very kind to him, and we see a very warm and loving friendship between David and Shaw. And we even find out through a line of dialogue from David is that he loves Shaw, which baffles us when we see a deformed drawing of Shaw, which was a depiction of what David did with his experiments on her. He most likely saw Shaw as a necessary sacrifice to contribute to his new-founded purpose as a creator formed by his godlike complex. It mainly turns into some sort of selective breeding when he kills the engineers on the planet, but uses Shaw, the only human, to create his new breed of alien he discovered, making the whole signal being sent to the colony ship as a lure to bring humans to the planet make complete sense. What will David do on the colony ship at the end of this film? The ending of Prometheus confirmed that the xenomorphs are a result of the pathogen DNA with the human DNA, and David's goal is to create the perfect being which he believes to be the xenomorph. His plan is now to use the ship of sleeping humans as science experiments the same way that he used Shaw, and developing an entire new race of xenomorphs and deliver them to a sustainable planet of Orgai 6. The sigh that David's character allows at the end that everyone thought was a sigh from Walter of relief after Daniels defeats the xenomorph was actually a sigh of disappointment from David's character as he looked at the xenomorph as a disappointment because it was inferior and it lost. And because of this, it wasn't what he wanted. They weren't perfected yet, and now he has 7 years to work on perfecting them. Why are the aliens not scary in this film? This question might seem subjective. I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that the aliens in this film appear to be less terrifying than we've seen in other films, mainly because in Alien Covenant, we see the full body of aliens most of the time. They're more exposed and less hidden, and pretty well lit for the most of it. Other than the scene in the shower, there are not many sequences that contains clips where there's just like parts of the alien being revealed, which would immensely help build the suspense in the film, which I know a lot of people were complaining that there wasn't as much suspense and tension with the aliens. However, with the lack of these shots and something to help create a much terrifying image in the audience imagination, these aliens really did not scare people as much as they should have, which is okay. And I think that the point is that Ridley Scott realizes that the xenomorphs are less scary as time goes on and people become more familiar with them, as they've existed for a lot more than 30 years. And I think that's the best way that I can explain the tonal shift within Prometheus. It went from an action horror thriller in the Alien franchise to an action horror drama philosophical existential film, making the aliens less of an ominous creature and mainly making them a regular enemy to put as an obstacle in front of the main characters as the film gets more into the struggles of the crew members and the ideology and emotional state of David. And by not making the xenomorphs really scary in this film, it helps us get a closer look at the relationship between David and the xenomorphs and making the connection between David and his creation a lot stronger. Where does this story fall on the Alien timeline? Alien Covenant is a prequel and a sequel, so some audience members are slightly confused as to where this falls in the timeline in the Alien franchise. When looking at the years each film is set in, we can see the linear order that Prometheus, being the first, takes place in 2093, followed by Alien Covenant taking place 10 years later in 2104, and then Alien, which takes place in 2122. So Covenant falls right in the middle of those two films. So that was most of the questions that I feel people were very curious about for Alien Covenant. If you guys feel like there's any unanswered questions, feel free to comment them below, and I will see you guys in my next video about aliens.